that natural hierarchy of I have the power of your grade and the power of how I talk to you in class versus me coming into Houston Sudbury School. And it's like, no, they share the power. And so I think that totally shifted the way that I formed relationships with kids.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Learning by Living, the podcast about people who learn or work outside of conventional schools. Current studies show that around 50% of school teachers leave the profession entirely within their first 5 years. Our guest today, Cassidy Younghans, taught 7th grade English in a public school for 5 years before leaving school teaching and finding a more fulfilling way to work with young people, shifting her path towards self-directed education. Gina sat down with Cassidy to talk about Cassidy's journey from conventional school teaching to these self-directed learning spaces, including her co-founding of the Epic Life Learning Community. They also talked about the differences Cassidy noticed between learning in conventional schools and what kids do when they own their own learning and living. Here is their fantastic conversation.
Hi, Cassidy.
Hi, Gina.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm so happy to be here. It's super surreal to talk to you.
I'm so happy you're here. So I always ask guests to introduce themselves.
Oh, gosh. Okay. Well, my name is Cassidy Younghans. I am 28. I am from and live in Dallas, Texas. I was a public school teacher for 5 years. I always wanted to be a teacher since I was a little girl. I lined up all my dolls and was like, listen, you're going to learn. And so I knew that was something that I wanted to do my whole life. And then 4 years in, I really started seeing a lot of needs that weren't getting met in the system. And so I was really motivated to learn about what's outside of it. So then I started doing research, started reading a lot, and then took the leap to leave public school and went and interned at a couple different self-directed spaces. And now I am a founder of a learning community in Dallas, Texas called Epic Life Learning Community that opened in September of 2019.
Awesome. So can you tell me more about your life as a public school teacher and what you were doing then?
Yeah. So I was a 7th grade English teacher. I taught only pre-AP classes because our whole school was only pre-AP and AP. It was an interesting new school that had been created by the district that was a fine arts based public school. So it was an academy, quote unquote, so kids could audition for the school in or out of district. And so I had a really diverse population of kids, and they were all very artsy. And teaching English was such a joy. And I think that I was in probably one of the most ideal opportunities I could have ever been in as a traditional teacher. Like I was given a lot of autonomy. Our leadership was pretty open-minded to kids expressing themselves more than I think maybe a lot of other schools that I experienced when I was doing student teaching and stuff like that. Like I was pleasantly surprised to see that I could put like a safe space sign outside of my door and things like that and hug kids and not feel like I was going to get in trouble. So there were a lot of things that were a little bit more open and progressive about just having relationship with kids to a point. But even in that situation, I was like, oh my gosh, if this is my ideal and I'm still not, I still see so many kids that aren't being served or could be served differently. That was kind of where the rub started happening, and I started seeing some different things. And then it was hard being a teacher because you're with all these other teachers, and some of them are very like idealistic, when like when you first come in and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to change the world. And then you realize like, oh, okay, like there's still like all of this game that we have to play of the test and all these different things. And you meet all these teachers who are kind of already disillusioned and have kind of lost their idealism, and maybe even have started feeling differently about kids. Even if they did like kids. And so then you see a lot of, I had a lot of teachers that didn't approve of the way that I interacted with kids because it was human and they had to disconnect.
So during that time, where did the switch happen? So like, what did you first read? What did you get into?
Yeah. Okay. So my principal of the public school, she's amazing. She was trying to be outside of the box, but she was definitely stuck in the box of, the whole system as, the big monster that it is. And so she wanted to be outside the box. So she started showing us these awesome YouTube videos. And she definitely was planting seeds for me that I don't think she knew she was doing. But the first one she played was Hack Schooling Makes Me Happy with Logan LaPlante, this 13-year-old amazing. Oh my gosh, it changed my whole.
Amazing video. Yeah.
And I sat there with a bunch of other public school teachers and was just like, yeah, but we can't do what he's talking about. Like, this is beautiful. I can't make this for my kids. Like within the system we're in, like it's not gonna. And then I even tried to like bring that video into my classroom and show the kids. And was like, look, this kid, like he's hacked his education and like he's really happy and all this stuff. And they're all like, yeah, but like we can't do that. So like, why are you showing this to us? I'm like, oh gosh. I was thinking like, oh, maybe we can be creative and find ways to hack your education. And then I'm like, oh gosh. So that was the first thing. And then she showed Sir Ken Robinson's School Kills Creativity. And so I'm just like, oh my gosh.
Oh gosh.
So I'm sitting there and I'm like, this is so funny because I totally see why all of this makes sense. And I can't do anything about the things you're showing me. It was so interesting. And so that was a little bit of the first things. And then I started remembering my own childhood Montessori. I went to Montessori school through 5th grade. And I was like, well, that's kind of like, an alternative approach. Maybe there are other progressive alternative approaches. So it was my 3rd year teaching. And I had been, just like thinking about some of that stuff on the periphery, but also trying to just survive being a teacher. And then one day I was just like, there's got to be something else. My 3rd year. And I just Googled, alternatives to traditional education, alternative education. And Arrow came up, of course, because Arrow is a great, amazing starting point that so many people find. So grateful for them as a resource because I hopped on there and I'm like, oh, what are democratic schools? What are free schools? I'm like, whoa, there's this whole world. What? And then I went and looked at Texas and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's a school called Macarios Community School in Grapevine. And they're a democratic school. I've never heard of any of this before. And so then I was, doing more reading and then I called them and I was like, can I come see your space? And a kid answered the phone and was like, but I didn't know they were a kid. Because they were like, oh, let me talk to blah, 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 and, we'll get back to you. And then they talked to the person and coordinated the whole thing. And then I got there and it was a kid by the phone. And I'm like, my mind was again blown. I'm just like, what? So it was a very quick progression once I Googled and started looking at, and then was able to actually visit Macarios in Grapevine and see it for real life.
That is the best story ever.
That's crazy.
The best story ever. Okay. So you Googled, and you found all these alternatives. And then, so what did you do with that information now? Like I always call it like, right. It's like the coming out, right? All of a sudden, like you see another path and you're like, oh my gosh. So what did you do with that?
Oh, it's crazy. Yeah. So I think my first step was like, again, visiting Macarios. So my first step was visiting and trying to get them to hire me. I brought my resume with me. I wasn't necessarily fully ready to jump ship from public school, but I was like, but maybe if I really like this, this would be a cool opportunity. And then still stayed in public school. And, but when I met the founder of Macarios, she was wanting to create a conference. And this is where self-directed path comes in. She was wanting to create a conference to bring awareness around self-directed education in Dallas-Fort Worth, to spread the movement, to bring it to life. And I was like, I really want to be involved in some way in learning more about this and getting to know more people that are interested in, this progressive style of education. And she was like, well, I don't have any job for you, but I would love for you to volunteer to help create this conference. And so then through that was when I got to meet Blake Bowles, and we had him as our keynote. And Blake and I had coffee before he did his keynote speech. And he was like, so what's going on? And
yeah.
I'm just not okay with what's happening and where I am. And he's just like, why are you staying there? And I'm like, because I'm not fit to do anything else. I'm a teacher. Who would want me in a self-directed space? Number one, I'm broken. I'm one of the people from the system. Why would they want someone from the system in this awesome, different system? Two, I felt like I just wasn't like, besides teaching, what skills did I have? So when you think about like self-directed, you want to be able to maybe teach woodworking or offer coding or like, and I felt like I had lost a lot of my own personal passions outside of teaching because I was focusing on teaching. And those things just really did go by the wayside for me. So I also felt like I didn't have any strong skills in different ways to bring in to like teach cool classes. So I just was like, I'm not fit to do self-directed. Like nobody's going to want to hire me. And I don't have anywhere else to go besides public school because as a teacher, I don't feel like I am, able to do any other job because that's where my degree is. And I know that's like not true, but it was definitely the story I was telling myself. And Blake was just like, no, do the thing. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like with Unschool Adventures, Blake, how did you even do that? Blah, 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 blah. I was telling him, I'm like, I don't know how you took a bunch of kids and just like went, across the world or whatever. And he's just like, you just do it. You learn it by doing it. The people that, are the ones making change aren't the ones that necessarily know exactly what they're doing, but they're the ones that are willing to do it and learn and take the risk and put themselves out there. And so I was like, oh, That's a good point.
Yeah.
So then him and I created my exit plan. So we talked about like, okay, what money would I need to be able to take a sabbatical year to go visit self-directed spaces? You know what I mean? Like how do I leave public school and move into like a year of kind of experiencing different spaces? And so we just made a spending plan, and I was like, okay, this is how much money I'm going to save my last year teaching, and then I'm going to escape.
Okay. So have an escape plan. You have the money, or you've budgeted the money.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do from there?
So I went and saw Peter Gray speak at Houston Sudbury School with my friend Kristen, because we were trying to recruit Peter Gray for our second conference to talk. So we were like, oh, well, he's going to be at Houston Sudbury School. Maybe we can go and like, maybe, make him like us enough to maybe be willing for us to, get him to come down to Dallas again and talk at our conference. And when I went to Houston Sudbury School, I'm like, oh my gosh, what a cool place. And I got to see the space and meet the people that created it and hear Peter Gray talk. And then a couple of months later, I saw, actually it might've been a year later, I saw that they were hiring for an intern that was actually going to be able to be housed in the school, because it was a 3-story house. And so the intern could live on the 3rd floor, and they were looking for from either a semester to a year intern. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have to apply for this. I have to get this. And so it was right towards the end of my last year teaching that I was, filling out its application. It was like probably January of my last year teaching, making a little video and sending it. And then I went down and visited and interviewed in person. And then that's when that got set up. And then in August, I moved down to Houston.
So when you moved and did the transition, what was the first thing you noticed? Like, what was the first thing you noticed about the environment? And what was the first thing you noticed about students?
Oh, that's hard. Okay. It's a great question. I mean, it's different in every space. I think at the Sudbury School, just like I think what struck me very first, and I don't know how relevant it, or like how, but what struck me first was just that they were really good with doing their own thing. And me walking in the room did not impact. Like, it wasn't like, oh, there's somebody in the room that we have to like please or be nice to or try to get to like us. It was like, we're doing our thing in our space. We feel safe. We feel comfortable. We don't have to woo anyone. We're just doing what we love. And maybe I'll look up and say hi to you, or I'll look up and say hi to you, but I'm not going to like, again, it was so different because I realized that all the public school kids were trying to woo me. Like, they knew there was a game of me liking them.
Right.
So they were playing that game. Like, a lot of them, obviously we created relationships, but just that natural hierarchy of, I have the power of your grade and the power of how I talk to you in class versus me coming into Houston Sudbury School. And it's like, no, they share the power. They have an equal say. They have a say if I stay, like if I'm an intern, they could easily say, no, we're not interested in having that person in our space anymore. And so I think that totally shifted the way that I formed relationships with kids, because they weren't actively pursuing getting me to like them. So it was it was so equalizing.
Gosh. Okay. And that makes sense, because I had just walked in prior to this recording to a traditional classroom as a field supervisor for one of my graduate students. And literally, like, you walk in and they want to know, who is this adult? Are they going to evaluate me? And like, why are they evaluating you? Right?
Mm-hmm,
So that was totally different. All right. And what else did you notice?
About the kids.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about, right?
Yeah. Let's talk about the kids first, like the change you saw in your students in traditional school versus a self-directed learning environment, and also the change you saw in yourself.
Okay. Yeah. I think a lot of what I noticed at Houston Sudbury School was a lot of the conversations I had with the kids at the school were similar to conversations I would have after school with public school kids. Like, my kids that would stay after school and like didn't really have, their parents hadn't picked them up yet, but they weren't there for tutoring. They were just like hanging out. And I was like the teacher that would let them do that. And all the other teachers were like, no, don't come in my room. Well, most of them, I'm not saying.
Yeah, no, because I don't want to spend the extra time.
Right. Or I have like so much grading to do or all these other things. And for me, it was just so funny because I gained so much more from just talking to the kids. And I was like, I'd way rather be talking to you than grading. So I can't grade right now. I have to talk to you. And so it was really cool to almost have that after school experience be my day to day at Houston Sudbury School, because it allowed these such deep bonds to be created through conversation, and through shared experiences and interests and endeavors that you went in together to create. So kind of like some of the clubs that were created at public school, I felt kind of more like that. And we're like, okay, I'm sitting with these kids and we're creating something together. We're co-creating. And there's not this huge power dynamic. And I really liked, for me as a facilitator at Houston Sudbury School, as a staff member, I really liked being held accountable by the kids. Like, I liked that there was that, like, not just that they could write me up, but like if they didn't like the way that I handled something, that they could tell me, and that they would. And then I could adjust and apologize and make amends and restore, which I think should happen a lot more in public school, of course. But I don't know if I had the opportunity, because of just the lack of safety for kids, to be able to say, hey, like, I don't like that you said that to me, or that hurt my feelings.
Yeah, I think the hierarchy, right, prevents us as teachers from taking the time to apologize to students if we do something wrong. Or
get the feedback, because we might not know it was hurtful.
Yes. Or if you say something wrong, or if you make a mistake, there's like this real pause and hesitancy to admit that you can make a mistake because you're the adult in the room, which is absolutely insane, right? Because we as adults make mistakes all day long.
Oh my gosh, yes.
But there's this feeling that we need to be the experts as teachers in public school.
Yeah, the experts, and also like these moral high ground people that like don't have needs or like fears, or that was another level that I feel like I get to connect with kids now on being human. Like, I don't think I was allowed to be, like, I didn't feel like I was supposed to be human in public school.
Yeah.
Like, when they tell you, like, I don't know why you're in the grocery store. Like, why you live a regular life? Like, it's because we as teachers, it's not like every other job. We almost present ourselves like this is all we are.
Yeah.
Or we were supposed to. And then you just do because it's the cultural norm, you know?
That's such a good point. So what is the change you saw in yourself, both as a teacher and as a human, when switching to this self-directed learning space?
I mean, kind of going back to what we were saying, like, you realize you still have to grow. Like, I mean, for me, that's how I felt. I was like, oh, like, I'm not a finished adult that has everything figured out, that's perfect, that knows the answers, that isn't, it switched because there was so much of a time where I was feeling like, okay, I came out of the oven, I'm done. Like, I don't know how to explain that. When you're an adult, you know, you're like, okay, like, I'm finished product, da 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 da.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh wait, da 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 is not like working, because it's, and so for me, it was huge. It's been a huge journey, and continuous even till now, of just like personal development and growth that's needed when you're going to be in these spaces, because so much of what I want to bring to kids requires me to do so much internal work, and looking at triggers that I have, and looking at the way that I communicate, and looking at expectations that I hold, and how society influences my expectations or my thoughts around kids. And I mean, all of it. And then also my thoughts around myself as a kid, and parenting, like really looking at parenting again. Because I remember when I was younger, I was like, oh, my kid's not going to act like that. Or, oh, that mom needs to get her kid under control. Like, even just all of that, like, I had to reframe everything about parenting and education that I had ever thought and felt so sure about. And it's layers. I'm still experiencing layers. You're peeling it back and you're like, oh, there's more. Like, oh, there's more. Oh, there's different layers. Right now I'm realizing that I kind of put expectations on certain kids and not other kids, because for some reason I like think that, oh, well, this kid should do this, and this kid shouldn't be able to do this, so it's okay. And it's like, well, is that really real? So even just still like looking at the stories we tell ourselves, and how much of that is based in how we really want to be around kids, like really grounding it in values.
Yeah, yesterday I read your essay in Tipping Points, and I loved the title. It was something like My Self-Directed Journey, right, through the self-directed environment. And I was just like, that's exactly what it is, right? It's a human journey. You are still growing. You are still changing, just like the students you serve. And it's a journey. And for an adult to realize that is huge, I think. It's a huge shift from the whole, I have my degree, I'm now at a school. I'm done. It's a huge shift.
Yeah. And it's like, it opens up your world again. It's scary as hell. It's so scary because you're just like, oh my gosh, now I have to, I mean, personal development is a lifelong thing. And it's also, it's beautiful, but it can be really exhausting and overwhelming. But also just the freedom that I then had to, find myself again. Cause I think I had kind of lost myself in the sauce of being a traditional educator. Like I really do. And even a little bit, I even think before that, even in my high school years, like just realizing, oh, like all that time that I really did numb out because I didn't want to be in the classroom or I didn't want to. So there's just, layers and layers and layers that you keep pulling back and sorting through.
I mean, I feel that like now. I feel that now. I feel like I'm constantly shifting and like I always think about expectations and then I like, think about self-directed learning and then those expectations go out the window. So it's a constant shift moving out from that environment.
And even just thinking, okay, I thought I was going to be a teacher in public school for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
To now my whole world is open again. Like it's all like the possibilities are endless. And it was so beautiful to like get that back. Cause I kind of didn't even realize I'd like sentenced myself to this like one path.
I get that 100%.
But then it was also, like I said, extremely overwhelming. It's like, oh God, I have the possibilities are endless. And so what do I do? So it's really like worked out super beautifully for in my personal experience, but it's very daunting and still is. Cause it's like, okay, how are we going to make EPIC sustainable? All that. So even now it's tricky in a different way. And I think that you have a whole nother level of shift, like from moving from teaching and self-directed to me interning at Houston Sudbury School. Again, another shift was huge when I was part of creating a community, because then you have all this ownership. You feel all this like responsibility and pressure to make it a certain way. And so then you have a whole nother layer of things you have to dismantle within yourself, because now you're talking to parents that maybe will enroll in your school or maybe won't, and maybe will make you financially viable and maybe won't. So it shifts the whole thing on a whole like visceral body level, because now you're taking I'm taking a financial risk to create this community.
Right.
So sorry, that's just a whole nother layer of it, when you're creating versus when you're interning
No, that's so true, right? Like, and also you have to get your head out of the space that like, I have to recruit, right? Because what you're really doing is you're seeing whether you're both a good fit for each other.
Preach. Yes, exactly.
But there's that financial piece that provides a little bit of pressure because you still have to survive. I get that. So can we talk more about like what you're doing now, the relationship between what you're doing at EPIC and what you're doing at the Sudbury School?
Yeah. So when I was at Houston Sudbury School, I was there for one semester. And then I went and interned at North Star in Sunderland, Massachusetts with Ken Danford. And so I was kind of his apprentice up there for, I think, a little over 2 months. And that was beautiful. And so that was another, totally different, but also very self-directed environment that I got to experience. That was really different from Sudbury and wasn't all ages. It was just 11 and up. And I learned a lot more about teens specifically, and a lot more about because I wanted to visit all these different spaces, because I kind of wanted to see like what resonated most with me, that I felt like I could serve a purpose in, and that I felt like would serve our community. So it was like this twofold thing. And I didn't even know necessarily if I was serving the Dallas community or not, but just kind of like seeing what aligned with me and what I felt I could live in. Because I knew like if I'm going to create something, I want to be able to feel really good about being a part of it.
Of course. Yeah.
And so how do I make this shorter? So interning at Sudbury and North Star, but then when I wasn't at North Star, I was in Dallas. So I was in Dallas in January and in April and May. And so in January, April, and May, I spent 3 days a week at one self-directed space in DFW, and I spent 2 days a week at Macarios. So I spent 3 days a week at a school called Inspired Learning Academy, and they're outside of Dallas, and they're just for teens, and they kind of have a unique approach. And then Macarios was the school that I had originally visited, that's in Grapevine, that was in Grapevine, that was a self-directed space as well. So kind of experiencing two different types of self-directed spaces when I was in Dallas. When I went to Macarios back when I was just visiting for the day, when I was still public school teaching, the founder had said, hey, I want to create this conference, right? And you could be a part of it if you want to volunteer. And so that's when I started getting into creating these conferences called Self-Directed Path, which is how I met Blake Bowles, because he was our keynote the first year, and then Peter Gray the second year, and then Joel Hammond this past year. And Kristen and I have been the ones co-creating that conference. And Kristen and I met through Macarios because Kristen also works at Macarios. So she worked at Macarios at the same time as I worked there. And before I worked there, she was also still working there. So we were creating these conferences together, and she knew me really well. And she called me up. She called me up on my way back from Massachusetts from interning at North Star when I was coming back to Texas. She called me up. Literally, I'm on the bus. And she's like, hey, Macarios is moving to Fort Worth. And Fort Worth is an hour away from Grapevine, just to give you perspective, an hour, maybe even 15 minutes away. And because some of their kids did live in Fort Worth and some of their staff lived in Fort Worth, and they were growing out of their building in Grapevine. So they moved for multiple reasons that totally made sense. And it left a lot of people that were in Grapevine without a space because they either couldn't transport their kid that far or, various other reasons. And so we actually had one of the parents that couldn't transport their kids to the Macarios in Fort Worth that was moving, that was really happy with Macarios. She had this call come in. She just said she felt it through her whole body when she was sitting in this room with all these parents that were like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with my kid? Now that Macarios is moving, I don't know what to do. And she just had it come in and just like this, I don't know, I don't think she called it a voice, but just this feeling of like, we need to make something for these people. And so then she reached out to Kristen because she knew Kristen from Macarios. And then Kristen called me and said, hey, we're thinking about opening this thing. Do you want to be a part of it? And I was like, oh my gosh, yes. And I need to know more. And so then I got back and we had tons of meetings. And so starting like very, very end of March, we just started meeting like all the time around creating this community. And that's kind of how it shifted. And then this community kind of has a lot of influences because of that, like influences from Sudbury, influences from Macarios, influences from North Star. Epic Life Learning Community is the name of the community we created. And it is not a school. We are a member of the Liberated Learners model, which is the North Star model. And basically the tenets of that are we're not a school. All of our kids are registered as homeschoolers, and we believe that the family should be in charge of their child's education. And we offer classes, but they're all optional. And we don't have an attendance requirement, things like that. So, and then bringing in a couple things from Agile Learning Centers. So a lot of we use Agile tools. So we're a Liberated Learners model that uses Agile tools. And we use Agile tools specifically for culture creation. So we love the community awareness board where, if somebody has an issue in the community, they put in an awareness, and then we create practices and we iterate and try those practices. And if they work, then we continue them. And if they don't work, then we revise. And so that's kind of the culture creation piece. And then the Liberated Learners is like the, base model that we function from as Epic. And we are ages 4 to 18. So even wider range than either of the learning communities I interned at. So North Star was 11 to 18, 19. And Houston Sudbury School was 6 to 18. So we're even wider of a range.
And then how many students do you have enrolled?
We have 27 right now. Our first year. It's like, like I said, I don't believe it. It's kind of ridiculous. Right. I was thinking like 10,
Yeah, right? Like 15, 10.
Mm-hmm.
That's incredible. Okay, so you have this community where you spend all your days. And so what do you see in the future? What are some future plans that you have for yourself and for Epic?
So for Epic, continuing to grow, we rent a space that we have room for growth, continuing to improve and like kind of fine tune the way that we function. We've learned a lot about how to set up like systems. That's been a little bit of a challenge, is like figuring out, okay, who does what, whose strengths are in what. and logistical things like that. And so really getting that strong. And then once those things I feel are strong, like I really am interested in creating multiple EPIC campuses, or, kind of, if that's possible. And I'm also just interested in helping people start self-directed spaces, or supporting like the wider movement is something that I'm definitely going to be spending the rest of my life doing in some way. One of the things that I'm really interested in exploring more is teacher liberation. So figuring out ways to help teachers that are in the traditional system, but maybe don't know there's other options, or do know, but don't really feel like they have a path to get there. So I'm really interested in supporting other people kind of to do a little bit of like what I did, but in their own way and in a way that maybe is more accessible. And then with the conference, that as part of that kind of, I'm really interested in continuing to be a part of like the bigger movement. So the conference, we're hoping to have it every year and a half now. We had it every year. And it was only a one-day conference. And so now what we're envisioning is in October of 2020, having more of a regional self-directed path conference, where we hopefully bring in people from like Oklahoma and Louisiana and surrounding states, and also just different areas of Texas, to really almost have a Southern regional conference around self-directed, and have it be an overnight, and have it have some school visits and things like that we hadn't incorporated before.
I love it. I love the teacher liberation aspect of it as well. Because
I'm doing a talk on that in, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No,
I'm doing a talk on that in at the Aero X conference next weekend. So the virtual conference, my goal is to kind of start unpacking that with other people in the self-directed world, because it's kind of like, what can we do as people that are, that got to the other side? Now, how can we hold space for people that are moving through it? And I think a big piece of that is holding space for teachers to come experience it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
it's just hard. It takes a lot of courage and bravery to be able to move from a space that you're pretty comfortable with and know so well, to a space that, is amazing and autonomous, but also has risks associated with it, like any change.
Tons of risk. And I think also conceptualizing it. So like for me, I read so much for a long time, but seeing it in person was life-changing. And I think if we can provide access to seeing it sooner, I think that like the switch cognitively might be easier or quicker. And I think that that's what I mean by like trying to make it a little bit more accessible, is maybe having it be like, there'd be times where we as self-directed spaces say, hey, one day, every other month we open our doors to any interested teachers, and you try to make it on a day where teachers are already off or something like that, or you partner with a school and say, hey, do you want 3 of your administrators to come visit? Like, kind of, I don't know, figuring out ways to do that. And then also I'm wondering what you think about this, but pushing it into the university spaces when it's helpful. So even just like doing a talk for teachers that are about to like go into the workforce, not necessarily about like, anything negative about public school, but just saying like, hey, these are all the different alternatives that exist, just so you know about them briefly. And then maybe from there, if you're interested in exploring any of them further, we could help you do that kind of thing.
I love that idea, because there are teachers who are currently student teaching, or are currently teaching and maybe don't fit the mold or haven't found their place within the realm of traditional education. And so opening things up and saying that there's options and describing those options, I think, is always so helpful. It's so interesting. I have been toying. I have a whole graduate program in my head regarding alternative teacher education and self-directed learning spaces. And so like one day when I'm brave, I'm just going to like put that out into the world.
I would love that.
Yeah. I have it in my head, and I know it's marketable and all of those things. But for now, I think, those types of workshops are helpful for teachers who might not fit in within the traditional spaces of education. That's so good. That's so good.
And some people feel like they have to go get a master's degree because they aren't happy in their educational situation. So they feel like they want to do something, to move into another space, but they don't really know what it is. And a lot of people were telling me like, oh, you should just go get a master's degree. And it's not that there's anything wrong with getting degrees or anything like that I couldn't gain from getting a master's degree. And that really wasn't what I needed. Like I needed a different type of environment. So I saw a lot of people do that. Like they'd get a little dissatisfied with teaching and they'd go get, 18 credits towards a master's degree and then move into a teaching some other role that's not dealing with kids directly anymore, but is maybe, in that more administrative space. I don't know if they were happier doing that, but I think that was their intention.
Yeah, I think generally people within education should know and should be open to the whole world of alternatives that are
access.
Like just access, right? It's all about equity and access and always has been for me. I love the self-directed space. I love and honor what my public school teachers do. And there's just a myriad of choices. And it's all about just trying to figure out what choice works well for you. And if you're unhappy with something, to be able to switch so that you're happy, right? Because it is all like going back to hack schooling makes me happy. It really is. I mean, life and career is all about personal happiness and what makes your heart sing. And that's what it is, right? So you have to choose that space.
That's so true. I just think of like Joel Hammond, for example, who wrote the Teacher Liberation Handbook. Him and his wife. Joel is the founder of Princeton Learning Cooperative, a self-directed space. His wife works in a public school, and his kids go to public school. And she really loves, what she does, and he really loves what he does.
Yeah, it's just about choosing spaces that are right for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's about equity also for the self-directed learning aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
So where can people find you?
Oh, goodness. Like on the interwebs. Well, my personal website isn't the most updated thing in the world. I definitely need to update it, but I've been just lost in the epic life learning community creation sauce. But it's CassidyYounghans.com. And Younghans doesn't have a D, but it is like young hands. Just no D, like Hans. And .com. So just CassidyYounghans.com or epiclifelearningcommunity.com is the website for our learning community. If you know anybody in Dallas-Fort Worth, or if you're ever visiting, we're always open to having people come see our space and get to know us and what we do. So we're really open to that. And so the website's epiclifelearningcommunity.com. And then Self-Directed Path, I got all the websites, is self-directed path.org.